My hashtag walkaway story. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I suppose I'm gonna hop on the bandwagon and tell this story so that people don't have to watch my channel from beginning to end, as in a lot of ways, my channel has basically been one big walkaway story. Born in 1982, I was raised a Democrat in Seattle, Washington. I was told that Reagan was bad and that Bush Sr. was bad. I remember being a kid and being excited when I saw Bill Clinton on TV due to the fact that he seemed likable enough that he could win, and he was one of the good guys. But of course, I didn't know anything about politics when he won in 1992, as I was 10 years old. I remember the Clinton era very fondly, probably due to nostalgia for my youth, but also because I lived in Seattle in the 1990s, when Seattle was actually pretty awesome. The grunge thing died by the mid-90s in Seattle, but we had an awesome underground electronic music scene fueled by a lot of young tech money. It should also be of note that I came out as homosexual in 1996 at the young age of 14, when the AIDS crisis was certainly far from over, and people were very openly hostile towards gay men very regularly. At the time, the Democrats did a good job of pandering to us, so it was natural to side with them. On election night in 2000, I went to sleep thinking that Al Gore had won, and then woke up to find that he didn't, and it was greatly depressing, but also then easy for me to ignore because by then I was a college student in New York City, I had a lot going on, and people didn't obsessively talk about political issues on social media like we do now. In fact, we didn't even really have social media besides bulletin boards and mailing lists. So I just thought, okay, we have a dumb hick in the White House, I'll just pretend like that's not the case. By 2004, I was angry that the Iraq War happened, but didn't think that Bush would get reelected. I didn't actually dream that he would get reelected. But when he did, I was super pissed at everybody, in a similar way to how I am now, mainly towards the left, because I didn't really know right-wing people, and it was because leftists were largely just really stupid, in my opinion. And I was also annoyed with the gay community for focusing on the fact that Bush wanted to preemptively ban gay marriage from the Constitution, when I figured focusing on the war was a better argument against Bush. However, after being super angry about the Bush administration for a year or two after his election, I majorly burnt out on thinking about politics and thus decided that it wasn't good for my mental health to care much about politics. So instead, I focused on my music and fictional writing type things, which I continued to do from the years of around 2005 through 2015. I pretty much never talked about politics on purpose. Thus, when Obama went up for election, I was really happy that a well-spoken, progressive black guy stood a chance of winning. But ultimately, that was about as much thought that I gave it, as it was really kind of like when I was a kid and I was stoked about Bill Clinton. Truthfully, if I'm going to be honest and self-reflect a bit, my unquestioned support of Obama was an act of racism from my part. I stupidly figured that he was a minority that was on the good team that always said that they stuck up for gay people. So obviously he must be a good guy that was doing good things. Because he's black, after all. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because I was being racist. Still, I never questioned that the Democrats were the good guys, the Republicans were the bad guys, and even though everything seemed to get worse and worse during the Obama years, and I didn't see the economy improve, I wanted to help them stay in power. Sure, housing was unaffordable in every city that I visited, and the people who lived in the non-affordable apartments were also generally in massive student debt and working corporate jobs that they didn't want to be working. But the media sure said that there was money, but it was just going to the 1%, so I figured that things were unfair. I didn't realize that the drastic majority of new property being built in places like San Francisco and Seattle was owned by foreign investors, of course, which is why the illusion of a growing economy actually seemed fairly plausible from my vantage point. But live and learn, I suppose. Finally, the 2016 presidential campaign started to really get heated in 2015, and I got extremely engaged. I started out being a hardcore Sanders supporter, as I assumed that the Republicans were evil, as that had been programmed into me since birth, and I thought he must be telling the truth about the economy having grown, but the money simply going to the 1%. That's what Sanders said. It made sense to me from my vantage point. I didn't know that the economy growing was largely just propaganda. I didn't know. Anyhow, it was around the time that I started supporting Sanders that I also had issues with the Democratic Party for the first time. I was promptly labeled a Bernie bro for supporting him and then viciously attacked repeatedly and publicly on Facebook by people I had once considered friends due to the fact that I wasn't supporting Hillary Clinton. Everybody always just said, Hillary Clinton is more realistic. She knows more about economics, and you're a misogynist. Which, granted, maybe was actually true, minus the misogyny part, but the problem was that they could never tell anybody why she knew more about economics. And that was probably because then they would have to admit that the Democratic Party was lying about the economy for the past 4 or 5 years. No, instead, Hillary Clinton's campaigners relentlessly fell back on allegations of sexism to mudsling anybody who supported either Trump or Sanders. That said, it was very clear to anybody paying attention that Sanders had far more actual support than Clinton, and so I predicted very early on that the DNC wasn't going to let him get the nomination, and of course, I ended up being right about that. Because, the DNC had all the money, and who was this random guy from Vermont that wasn't even a Democrat, really? So I told all my friends, Sanders will be cheated out of the nomination, and then Trump will beat Clinton, because if people didn't already hate her, which they mostly did anyway, they'll certifiably hate her after she cheats Sanders out of the election. So you have to make sure that Sanders wins. Well, I was blocked and unfriended by hundreds of people for saying such things, usually after they called me a misogynist, and it kind of pissed me off. As a result of being called a misogynist one too many times by Clinton-supporting feminists, and a few other things that happened in my life, I started really looking into feminism, in terms of history, theory, and contemporary feminist organizing. And my jaw dropped for about 3 months straight. You see, I had always been under the impression that feminism had mostly good arguments, and I figured that the people who prioritized feminism as an argument ahead of the actual policy differences that Clinton was proposing were simply choosing a bad strategy by focusing too much on the feminist part when there might be better things to talk about. Well, it turned out that I was wrong, but not in that the feminist argument was a good one. No, I was assuming that it was a good argument that they shouldn't be spending too much time focusing on. But it turned out that it was beyond a weak argument that they should have never brought up at all. Because it wasn't just flawed, but rather the reverse of what is true. Thus, I learned over the course of the next few months after that feminists are wrong about basically every current issue, besides the fact that they should be allowed to show their nipples in public and have access to some forms of birth control that they might be denied in places like Oklahoma or somewhere like that. In fact, it turns out that the feminists have a heinous grip on Western governments, media, academia, and primary schools, and they are actively oppressing men in numerous ways, and then fighting to make things worse for males, and calling it social justice. I was appalled and embarrassed to have ever been associated with the party of feminism. Thus, when my prediction about Sanders being robbed of the nomination came true and the election came down to Clinton versus Trump, I tried to tell people, you guys, Clinton is definitely gonna lose. Her only argument is that people should vote for her because it's the feminist thing to do. But once anybody examines feminism critically, they'll realize that it's a bunch of BS. Well, once again, I had a lot more faith in my friends than many of them deserved, because they did not take that very well. They called me crazy, often unfriended me, and were generally really unpleasant. And I continued to lose hundreds of friends on Facebook, though I never considered quitting with the speaking of my mind, because I guess that's what type of guy I am. Still, the funny thing is that, even after all of this, I was still thinking that maybe I was a Democrat, and that maybe I would prefer Clinton to Trump, in spite of the fact that I was starting to secretly root for him when he embarrassed her in the debates, and I was meeting more and more people who were Republican Trump supporters who were totally nice. Still, despite the fact that I was starting to feel like Trump probably wasn't actually homophobic or really even racist, at least not compared to the relentlessly racist and growingly homophobic Democrats, I was still holding on to some belief that I was maybe a Democrat in some way, and they just had a bad candidate at the moment. Well, there was a straw that broke the camel's back for me. And that's when the Clinton campaign worked with the Anti-Defamation League to declare Pepe the Frog to be some sort of racist right-wing hate symbol, which was the world's most popular internet meme at the time. And that's when they simply went too far. This wasn't just a problem for me as an individual, being that I had shared the image countless times when people had made funny captions and drew slight alterations on the character. But I was annoyed because countless left-leaning people had been using it for literally years and years before the election, and yet I saw some of those same people fully drinking the Kool-Aid and believing that maybe it really was a far-right racist symbol, even though they were just sharing it the previous week. I mean, seriously. The fact that Clinton thought it was a good idea to basically call the entire internet, including countless of her own supporters, some sort of far-right racists because they shared funny memes of a cartoon character on Facebook or Twitter, and worse, the fact that she had the power to get a supposedly respectable organization to corroborate the story and say that it was true. Well, that was just scary, especially considering people are so incredibly terrified of standing up to the political correctness of the left that they were thinking to themselves, "Oops, I guess I shared a racist meme on accident," instead of thinking to themselves, "No, Pepe the Frog is not a hate symbol. It's the most popular cartoon meme on Earth. You wannabe fascistic lunatic." At that point, I started calling Hillary Clinton Hillary Stalin regularly and non-apologetically. And from that point onward, I told everybody that I was a full-blown never Hillary type person. And I will never regret that decision because I will not live in a world where the leader of my nation can declare a cartoon frog used by basically everybody a hate symbol and has the power to get people to believe it. Because it's not just the Anti-Defamation League that will do the Democrats' bidding. They also have the SPLC and basically all of mainstream media in their pocket. That was basically my official walk-away moment because I voted independent in the election, and the Democrats have just gotten worse and worse ever since, reminding me that I made the right decision. None of this is surprising to my longtime subscribers, but I hope other people find it interesting. I am not a Republican, and I have no idea how I might vote in the future, but I doubt I'll ever be a Democrat again.